Well, welcome everybody. You are listening to In the Company of Charity podcast. My name is Sister Liz, and I'm here as always with my dear friend, Sister Elizabeth Grimes. Sister Elizabeth, how are you?
I am doing very well, Sister Liz. It's great always to be with you. Another intro. I know everyone's just waiting to hear all the wonderful news that's been happening around us. First off, weather report.
Yes,
I'm
always
in
with
the
the weather
Midwest.
report.
I'm not in the Northeast, so it's like 10 degrees warmer here, but we did have 3 wonderful days where it went down to the 30s, and I was feeling like God is good, brought me back,
Chill.
and then the temperature went back up again. So I still think God loves me, but it's going to be a little warmer. So it has been absolutely beautiful here. And we've had some wonderful times to go walk in Forest Park, which is right near us, in the zoo, which is also very close. No jokes about how we're close to the zoo. We are very close to the zoo, though, very close. And so that's wonderful because the zoo is free here, which is
praise
also
God.
wonderful. So you can go take a walk in the zoo, see all families, and it's just delightful. So yeah, St. Louis is treating me well, and it's starting to get a little nippy in the air, and the trees are changing, and it's absolutely gorgeous with fall foliage. Nothing like it anywhere, no matter where you see it. There's nothing like seeing trees.
We had a
Change their
cold front
colors.
here in South Texas, and it went from like 90 to 70 for like a minute. And
Wow. Yeah, did you get out your jackets?
I wore a sweater for the first time and I loved it.
Dig it out, right? And you're like, God, I saved that one sweater for the occasional trip up north.
Pretty much. But I
Yeah,
hear you had an alpaca experience, which is pretty
we
amazing.
we had a Laudato Si experience. We've been doing a unit on Laudato Si, which has been really pretty exciting. And of course, our community and many other communities are involved in the Laudato Si platform. All of this celebrating, the 7th year of the Holy Father's encyclical letter on Laudato Si, care of the earth, care of our common home. And yeah, so we went to Seton Harvest, which is the farm that our community, that the Daughters of Charity run. Again, that's Seton Harvest in Evansville, Indiana. And it's a great place. And yeah, so we went there and we got a chance to talk to Sister Sharon Horace about her own look at the issues around climate change, around environmental issues. She did this amazing conversation with the seminary sisters and ourselves on just the conditions in 17th century France around the issues around poverty and war and this little ice age. I mean, you have to look it up. I can't do it justice in the few minutes we have, but it was really, really amazing to centralize for us the issues, contemporary issues certainly, but that even back in the 17th century, climate, drought, flooding, whatever it was, impacted the poor basically. And that's really the focus we want to look at, right? That disadvantaged people, people who are living in areas of poverty, are usually the ones who suffer the most because of environmental pollution, climate change, all of those issues. And we just really need to pay attention to that so closely. We also had a visit to the Sisters of Providence in Terre Haute, Indiana. Indiana's big farm country. And it was beautiful, both farms, absolutely beautiful, do wonderful work, grow really cool stuff and feed lots and lots of people. And they also have an alpaca farm. Like, I don't know if you call it a farm, but they have a herd, and one of the alpacas was pregnant when we were there, and she had her baby the day we left. So yeah, so she had a little girl, and it was adorable. They have chickens and they have horses, and that was fun to feed the alpaca. So little things in life that just bring you great joy when you get to kind of interface with something outside the city and outside of the kind of the normal stuff. So yeah, so that's
I love that. And the alpacas are really adorable creatures. I mean, they're just
oh my gosh,
cute. They're cute.
Yeah, and she, they talked a lot. The woman who walked around with us, she just did a great job in explaining like the behavior, animal behavior. It's so interesting, like we think we're the only ones who have, polite behaviors, but alpacas are like really good to each other. While a mom after
Oh,
birth is kind of taking care of herself, doing what she needs to do. After birth, the other female alpacas kind of take on the baby alpaca until the mom is ready to come back and nurse. Very, very sweet. They don't
oh.
like ravage the land. They don't eat the grass down to the roots because it's their nourishment. So they just kind of nibble at it. I mean, one of the sisters said they're so polite and they're so gentle. They are. I mean, that was you just got this sense like these are just wonderful, wild looking, kind of crazy looking creatures that are just so gentle, and can be kind of mean, like they do spit at you and stuff like that.
Now, if
But
you
their
want to
wool is
see
absolutely
some,
amazing.
you want to see some crazy creatures, you can go down the street to our park and you can see the javelinas. There's a family of javelinas over there. For those who don't know, javelinas are wild pigs here in South
Wild
Texas.
pigs. See, we are just the Laudato Si girls today, sister. It's admirable for us javelinas and alpacas and
Look them up.
chickens, and
You're going to be frightened by your
that's
Google
right.
image.
Yeah, yeah, I
But
know.
I
Yeah,
mean, we could go on. We could go on about God's creation.
we'll do that in a co-host chat at some other time. But we have a really important episode today, and you have a great interview, as you always do, with Sister Lisa Laguna, vocation director extraordinaire. And
Mm.
this is another episode of practical tips on discernment and vocation from Sister Lisa Laguna. We could just do a series of her just talking about vocation tidbits
She
and
is a hoot.
practical ways. She is, yeah, but she does give good information in a way that you'll remember it because it becomes a little bit theatrical and comedic.
Yes, you'll have a good laugh. We love her, and you will too. Enjoy this episode of Sister Lisa on vocation discernment and discernment of all things. And as always, you guys can follow us on Instagram, the IG. It is Company of Charity Podcast. And we always welcome your feedback to our email address, companyofcharity@gmail.com. So thanks so much. Enjoy the episode. So, Sister Lisa, we always love to have you on and talk about vocations and discernment and young people and just the whole world of how do I find out what God's plan is for my life. And, if I'm entering a community, how's that adjustment? I mean, there's always questions that pop up, and these questions are eternal and yet ever ancient, ever new, as they say.
Yeah, right. Eternal is when you're 19 years vocation like me and you're still asking those questions. It does feel eternal. You're right.
So
I'm happy to.
maybe we could talk a little bit about family. I think that is a big a joy, a challenge, something that everyone who discerns whether they're discerning marriage or they're entering community, it's a readjustment of how things are with your family. And so, what kinds of things are you seeing as you're working with young people? And, what are your recommendations? What are some examples that you've experienced in ways to help people navigate those sort of difficult waters?
It's so funny because I know I've said this before on your podcast that when you enter community or you get married, your primary place of belonging changes. For us, it becomes our local community. That's our primary place of belonging. If you get married, it becomes your spouse and, God willing, eventually your children, your family. So that is first of all, it's a challenge to imagine. It's not as dramatic as uprooting yourself and replanting. it's really more extending our belonging. And when we say primary place, we mean things like in practicality, it practically means we spend our holidays together. We don't go to our families. That does not happen in every community, I think, but I think in most women's communities that happens, that where we have this primariness. Um, and again, it doesn't mean you don't necessarily see family at certain holiday times, but not on the actual day when we're celebrating with each other. But the other thing that it brings to my mind is how involved our family is in our discernment journey and in our belonging journey once we're in. Are they part of our belonging? Do they feel an extended part of the Daughters of Charity family? Is that a relationship that we've nurtured with them? And like I said, starting that out with have we included our family in our discernment journey? And I think that's that's a tough one. And again, we've talked about it a little bit before about when do I let my family know what starts happening. And this is what I have come to understand is our families need to know.
Number one, they need to know.
Timing is negotiable. Timing is negotiable. Whatever, discern that with the folks you're discerning with, right? Your vocation director and people who know your family well, or other family members that are more on board. If you are afraid that your family will struggle with being on board, but it absolutely is a must. And helping them come into this space is also so important. It's not a must. I mean, we have histories and stories of saints whose families never never agreed with them entering consecrated life. But I've just learned that we are so rooted in the first part of our life with our family. And I realize there are different forms of family and that not everybody has that same experience. But, I would say still by and large, people are still connected pretty deeply with some family members. And if they are not, at least somewhat accepting, I find that it's very hard to stay the course. It's very hard. You got to have at least one family member that's really pulling for you. I'm not saying it's a rule, and there sometimes the family members come a few years later, like you've been in already, and they show up, but
they come around.
Yeah, it's not everybody has the story of their parents being so excited to celebrate their vows with them, or that just isn't everybody's story. But when that's not part of the story, then I think we've got to find some connection, because it isn't just picking up your roots from where you were and putting down, it's an extension of those roots, and it can be pretty challenging.
It makes me think of a dialogue that we had in our local community. We shared our stories with each other, not just our vocation story, but our whole life, the whole picture of our life story. And I realized, for me, growing up in the military family, that for me, I didn't have like one place that was home, like that I grew up in this house and my parents, been in this house for 30 years and this neighborhood and that sort of thing. And so for me, it wasn't as hard to say be far away from the place that I would call home, which I call Virginia at this point, or Washington, D.C. But that's not everybody's story. And to come to, I mean, now we're talking about discernment specifically with the Daughters of Charity, to come to our community where we move around, every few years, on average. And so I think it's just interesting to note that you might consider that when you're looking at different communities of, is this a monastery that I'm going to stay here and be in this place with these people forever and always? Or is this a kind of, we move around a lot, or I could get missioned internationally? Those are a lot of different factors based on your upbringing.
No, you're absolutely right. That it's if you have a little bit of a travel bug, then like a missionary community sounds like a good place to look at, not because, not just for the benefit, not even for the benefit of travel, but because that's a comfortable thing for you. Not everybody's comfortable, exactly just what you said. And I think the other thing is, yeah, the ability to, we say, um, I think you and I've said this before. I don't know if your province has this saying, but in our province, when we're missioned, we always say that the last thing we pack is our heart, and the first thing we unpack at our new mission is our heart.
Mm.
This ability to be wholehearted where we are. And it's so easy to say. It sounds very poetic, and we should write, little little songs to go with it or something. But the truth is, it's really hard and messy and challenging, especially because we feel the loss when we move. If we have given our whole heart to that place, we should feel a little loss and longing, a little longing, and then eventually our heart is filled by our new place and our new ministry and the sisters we live in that new local community and all those things. Now that's a tall order. And we just say it like it's gonna just be like that. You're just gonna arrive and everything's gonna just work out perfectly. And that takes work on by of every single person involved. And that's the ongoing work of community. And that's, I would say, in my experience of working with women, that is the number one thing that actually seals the deal. When we're talking about discernment, is community life. It either seals it or it tells us, it seals the deal one way or another, right?
Mm.
Because we all know that we can pray and serve without being in community, but community life is a pretty intense and wonderful thing. And most days it's wonderful, and there are days where it's very challenging. And but I just know when I'm talking with the ladies, that's the one thing that's different that they can't do, just on their own, just being single. So uh yeah, so I'm thinking, we have somebody who recently entered who is also from a military family, and just like her ease of going from place to place is so different than mine. And I'm like, she's like, oh, no problem, okay. Like it really is no problem for her. It really is no problem for her. Me, it takes a little more work to imagine myself in a place different than where I've been.
Mm. I mean, I think community life can be such a challenge that if maybe there were some muscles that we could build in preparation or in discernment, because these things are just across the board, like whatever community you enter, if you're living a common life, there are going to be personalities and issues and decisions made that you don't agree with, or maybe that aren't unjust. Obviously, if they're unjust, then that's a whole different level. But things that aren't my way of doing things.
Mm-hmm. Right. And we don't take out Craigslist ads to look for the right sisters to live with. Like it does, we get assigned, and we believe that the Holy Spirit assembles that local community, right? So sometimes, yeah, sometimes we're wondering like where the Holy Spirit did this. It's just like we are such a motley crew. How did this happen? Um, so yes, uh, some of the things that I have heard that have helped people, and I believe this to be true. Well, what is work our work environment, right? So if we're working to if you don't have a job that's just all independent, but team projects help, because when we do team projects, there's a lot of give and take, right? Unless there's just like a bully on the team, and then we all just, that's just a tough ride to go on. But I think doing different kinds of team things. The other thing is volunteering. Now, this one is less popular when I suggest it to people, but I think it's still a good thing to volunteer at a ministry, right? That, like, let's say it's a food pantry or something like Meals on Wheels, or, something that takes a lot of people to run. Volunteering to do the job that you don't usually want to do.
Mm.
Because when we're in that space and that place, like our communication skills have to be turned way up, right? Like I have to really be paying attention to what they're asking me to do because it's not the thing I'm the best at. Um, and working together is really important. And these are people I don't know. And even though half the time I go someplace and I'm sure I know a better way to do it, um, which is just such a vice of ours, right? I know I have it. I'm sure, like, if they just did it this way, it would be so much better, and I wouldn't be wasting my time. Um, but to do things that, and I, so what you don't hear me saying, go do things that are bad for you, but just things that are maybe out of our comfort zone with others. So that doesn't mean to go for a walk by yourself and go for a hike by yourself because that's really hard. I mean, go ahead and do that. That's not going to benefit your experience of community, but doing things and also practicing not being in charge. If you're like a take charge person, practicing not being in charge in situations. And it takes a lot of humility, it takes a lot of generosity to not be in charge
Mm.
and to be willing to do what other people suggest. That's hard stuff. Because then when it comes to things like, you know, I don't eat seafood. And so and I live with people who love it. They love it. They can't wait for Fish Friday. And I'm just like, please make it mac and cheese Friday or something silly like that. uh, yeah, just saying, wait a minute, I can do this. I don't like it. It's fine. And I don't have to eat it. We're not forced to do things, right? But I don't have to gripe about it.
Mm.
Like, oh, Fish Friday again. Here we go again. Roll it out. More pink salmon. Hooray, hooray. All the moody stuff I could do, or just say, well, I'm really happy for this person because this absolutely makes their day.
Mm.
It takes a lot of generosity to do that of spirit. And sometimes when we're protecting ourselves, our space, our rights, I always laugh because the words like fair and rights, all those things, like those are nowhere in the Bible. And yet we really hold on to them really tightly. Like, I have a
Those
right.
are American values. Those are
Exactly. I'm
not biblical
entitled to all
values.
these things. We're really not. We don't really have those rights, and we're really not entitled. you know, we're uh, we're really called to something greater than that, and it's really called radical generosity, and that's what it takes to live community life, I think. And we experience it. I know I experience it far more than I ever share it, and lots of radical generosity. It's really what I think is the key to living community life well.
Those who might not be familiar with all of the branches of the Vincentian family might not know that our Vincentian priests and brothers have a couple extra values that are important to them, and one of them is mortification, which I think is a word that has been lost even in Christian Catholic circles of how can we voluntarily take on something that might be uncomfortable, that might go against our natural tendency. And I think as someone who's sort of an extrovert myself, and of course we have our own opinions and thoughts and ideas, and I'm the one who has a little, like, I call it an easy pass between my brain and my mouth. I need like a little more of a filter at times. But it's one of those things where it's like, well, maybe my mortification is not having to share my thoughts about every aspect of everything, or to let everybody know what my opinion is about such and such a thing. It's getting creative about of knowing ourselves and then saying, like, maybe I can grow in this or that area.
Mm-hmm.
That's tough.
It's not fun. And I'd like to suggest that mortification and radical generosity are the same thing. It takes a lot to be generous. And just what you're saying, like, well, for example, if I often think I know the best way to do things. That's why that's a good example for me to use, right? Or to say, or, it should have happened like this should have been that. Um, when I need to slow my roll a little bit, then I always give myself 10 seconds. I force 10 seconds, just 10 seconds before I let something come out of my mouth. And usually in that 10-second discernment, I realize just keep it. Just keep it, Lisa. That wasn't for that. There's nothing charitable about what's just going to be said, just that's just ridiculous. And it's not going to, it doesn't, it doesn't help anybody's life. I didn't enrich anybody by saying that. I just took the opportunity to be blah blah blah, to make sure that I thought my voice had a right in that setting too. And it really comes back to those same things. So I think when I think of mortification and discomfort, sometimes that means um not, well, the easier things are like not complaining, right? Like trying our best not to complain. And some of that complaining comes from this sense of entitlement. But I'm entitled to this. Like, I'm entitled to quiet when I want it. I'm entitled to be loud when I want to be. I'm entitled to this. And so I'm entitled to not smell food I don't like. You
Mm.
know, well, first of all, none of us are entitled to any of those things. I, I say to sisters, if you want to be alone and quiet, then you go to your bedroom. Like that's the place. Common spaces are not for that. Like they are for all of us to decide how they're going to be used at a given moment.
Mm.
Um, and if we don't land on, if the popular opinion is not, make your day, we do have private spaces. But the this notion of generosity of saying, you know, you can experience this thing that is very meaningful for you, sister, even though it makes me very uncomfortable. Sometimes it's in driving when we're passengers in a car and we think we got to tell sister, Susie Q, that's a little fast, the speed limit is this or that, or, boy, you got really close, there are lines on the road. I mean, all the 20,000 things you could say. And yet, the one thing I always say before I get in a sister's car, I'm like, there are no dents on this car. She clearly drives just fine. She doesn't drive like me. But there's her the car she drives is in good shape. Like, get over it. Get over it. Be generous. Be
Mm.
generous and say, no, it doesn't need to be out there. Just, it's okay. I don't know, little things like that I think go along with the same with how we do things in the house, how somebody cooks, how somebody does this, how loud the TV is. That's always a big one. And
Mm.
houses of intergenerational living, like, or intercultural living, how loud things have to be. And that, oh, we go around and around with those kinds of things. One sister's needs are being met and not mine. And
Yeah. It's the rub of every day. And
Mhm.
I think trying to help us navigate that and to have it in perspective of there may be 1 out of 99 things that really bothers me, but there are 99 really awesome things about community. And when you come in as a young person, there's that honeymoon period that everything's wonderful, and the sisters are all little St. Louise de Mariacs walking around.
Right.
But
And they're paying a lot of attention to us in the beginning, right? Yeah.
especially if
That's
you're
nice.
new and young and beautiful like I was when I came 15 years ago.
Exactly.
So what's your advice when it comes to the disillusionment that is bound to happen? I mean, this happens in marriages and new relationships and going to a different school or in a job. Like there's inevitably that disillusionment that happens when the newness wears off. Is that a sign that the person shouldn't be there? How do you discern through whether something is, especially if you're a pre-postulant, you're visiting sisters, you're, in your postulant year, even, like how do you figure out if something is a sign that you shouldn't stay or this is not for you, versus it's just, you're adjusting and things are going to be hard and it's just not going to be great 100% of the time, 100% of every day.
Well, I think, first of all, that happens to every single sister. There's Sister Elizabeth, your colleague, called it the invasion of the body snatchers, like she had this whole imagination. She shows up, and where did they all go, and it's just, there is some truth to that, as there is in any committed relationship, right? That we stopped putting perfume on when it's kind of like how we are when we date in the beginning, right? We get dressed up, make sure we brush our teeth, and then at some point, you stop brushing your teeth just to, hang out with somebody. You stop putting on, pretty smelling things. You show up in torn jeans, there's just this whole different experience. And the danger of relating to each other like that only, which is why we have extensive live-in experiences. The danger is that we only get to know a person in their wooing form, right? Or the community, because the community woos too, right? Like we only get to know each other and we think that that's reality. So then we set up expectations around, our wooing selves instead of our real life selves. Very disillusioning and painful for all intimate relationships. Um, they're not all horribly painful, but they're often disillusioning. And I think the thing is to remember, like, what breaks do you want people to cut for you? Like, when I think about how grateful I am that the sisters have tolerated me for so many years, singing off key and singing often. I walk around and I just always have a song in my head, and it comes out inevitably for the whole world to tolerate. and, and
That's
I
their
can think of
mortification.
exactly. So I'm just providing it for others, no problem. And, um, and for the most part, it has sisters have just smiled, they haven't said, really, keep your day job. I mean, I do get that pretty often, but never out of a sense of, just completely dislike. I think um the ability to tolerate each other as we really are, and not just to tolerate, because that's kind of that's pretty much the low rung on the ladder, right? So what has to begin is tolerating, right? For example, I'm a big Dodger fan. A good friend of mine's a big Giant fan. And to tolerate, where to the point where I just don't care anymore. I
Mm.
really just don't care anymore. I because I love that person. So all those other things become less important. The fact that she doesn't pray, maybe, and she doesn't take postures that I appreciate. She doesn't love the rosary as much as I love it. It's a struggle for her, where I just think I can't breathe if I don't say it. Um, so we stop like judging each other. I think so much of it comes out of that position of judgment. Like, well, daughters surely are supposed to be like that. What is this? Instead of saying, well, maybe I'm going to find out what a daughter of charity is when I live with them and see how they're living. We have a lot of, I live with a sister who always says that expectations are prepaid disappointments.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, expectations are prepaid disappointments. And I think kind of, yeah, right? Like, I'm expecting that we're just going to be having faith sharing every day at the table. Well, when a sister is in her 80s and every joint hurts, like getting to the supper table to be with us was a great act of generosity already.
Mm.
Can I receive that? Or am I just going to hold her accountable for not being the chatty Cathy that I would appreciate at supper?
Wow.
And that I think our constitutions call us to, or, a sister asked me the other day, she goes, why does my toe hurt? She was in her 90s. And I said, well, I think because your toe is 95 years old. And I was like, that toe's been working hard for a really long time. It's gonna hurt. I don't really have
gosh.
another explanation. But and so then every act she does to bring herself to a place where I am or the community is a great act of generosity. And I need to start having those eyes to see that.
Mm. I think, as we sort of move towards wrapping up, I I want to go back to something you said about the poor as our lords and masters, because maybe not everybody who's listening,
Sure,
is
sure.
familiar with that phrase. Um, but to see the people we serve and the people around us as Christ Himself, whom we adore and love, as our master, I think it's an important point, and I think it helps us to live community life better when we're with people who are in need, who are struggling, who don't have their act together. And it helps me to put into perspective everything for real. Like, it
Right.
helps me to put my own, like, inconveniences or issues,
Mhm.
to say, like, my stuff is nothing compared to what people are dealing with out in the world, and the people that I see every day who, are traumatized, and, you know in domestic violence relationships, you name it. I mean, any number of things. um, but it helps me to get beyond myself, and I think that's where the connection is with community, and with our service, and with our prayer. Like, all of that gets me outside of myself and my own focus and what's going on with me. And it's like, there's a priest I knew, well, you probably know him, Father Leo, the cooking priest, and he always
Oh,
talked about the trinity, me, myself, and I, as the
yeah.
trinity. And boy, doesn't community life and service just kind of challenge that attitude that we can have?
Yeah, I think if we live in a spirit of scarcity, then we're going to always be looking for ways to fill voids in us, and I think, um but believing that we live in, at least in our community life, that there's not a spirit of scarcity, there's a spirit of abundance, then I start to be less afraid of what I'm not getting my hands on, that I think is mine by some kind of right or whatever, or that if I don't get it, I will never have it. There's just, and so much of kind of our rubbing up against each other comes from like this kind of, fear. uh or I was just thinking, it just popped into my mind, like this whole FOMO thing, fear of missing out. Um, younger people are not the only ones who have that. That's part of what some of our older sisters are dealing with, and we're not all chiming into that. it, for them, it's probably not a fear, it's a feeling of missing out,
Mm.
and we're like, well, you weren't on that train. Well, yeah, because she was on her 95-year-old toes trying to get someplace. And I'm not being sensitive to that. Like, and that's just an example. Like, that conversation with that one sister was kind of fun about her toes. But the truth is, like, there's other reasons. So also, not to minimize, whatever your stuff is real stuff, right? But we don't have to be. First of all, we're not alone in our stuff, and to remember that, right? Both you and I have to remember that. Like, even if we're responsible for, other things, that we're not alone. We have resources, and that's why it's so challenging for us to journey with people who are suffering, right? Because we know what our resources are, and we watch and recognize that not everybody has the same access that I do, and that's rough. But I think all of this idea of just like, yeah, let's be present, let's be generous, let's be forgiving, 7 times 7 D, right? Like the Bible says. Let's be willing to forgive each other as often as we need it. And then let's be willing to be a little uncomfortable.
Mm. I any last one thought I had, one recommendation for
Hmm.
for the listeners, especially those who are really thinking about God's plan for their life and those big life choices of, um, getting to know yourself, paying attention to how you are growing in virtue. These are all things that, whatever life you're called to, those are keys to all of it. And to let the Lord lead you. But your final thoughts, your recommendations? Now, we talked a lot about community life, so
Yeah, it seemed like welcome to the community life blog. I think that first of all, I agree with what you said. I think that there's a lot of benefit in that. And I think a sister told me once, who was one of my early formators, who said, we are never more generous than when we first come. And we can grow in it, but we generally, like, that's our stance, or that isn't our stance. Now I think that there's room for conversion and all that stuff, but like, pray for that. If anything else, if you feel called to any life that is not solitary confinement, pray for generosity, pray for that gift, because I know I appreciate it when I receive that from somebody. I think we all do. We're all like touched by it. And so that's a great gift we can give to each other,
Beautiful. Well, thanks again, Sister Lisa. You're the bomb. Thanks for taking the time.
Thanks, Sister Liz. Thanks.
Until next time.
Yeah, blessings.